For joining us on relatively short notice on this important topic. Thank you for joining the Honourable Peter Malinauskas, Premier of South Australia, and also some special guests, Professor Nicola Spuria and Professor Mike Steer, for tonight's first community forum into our algal bloom. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge we're meeting on Aboriginal land. We acknowledge that this land that we meet on is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. We also pay respects to the cultural authority of Aboriginal people visiting and attending from any of the other areas across South Australia and Australia. So just to give you a rough mud map, we've still got people joining. Welcome. There's seats towards the back if you're stuck. Just want to give you a little mud map of how the process should work today. First of all, I just would like to acknowledge some other special guests. We've got Louise Miller-Frost, MP, in the audience, and Alex Dighton, MP, the member for Black. We've got Tammy Allen, the Mental Health Commissioner for South Australia, and my colleagues Adam Reid, the Chief Executive of the Department of State Development, and Ben Bruce, the Chief Executive of the Department for Environment and Water. So, process today. Firstly, we're going to hear from the Premier, who's going to position and provide some context in what we know so far. Then we're going to hear from Professor Mike Steer, and then from Professor Nicola Spuria. Then we're going to move into a sort of a on the seats panel Q&A session. What we'll do is we'll bring a mic up over to this side. We don't have a central aisle, so we'll bring a mic up to this side, and we expect that there'll be questions from the audience. What I'd like to ask people to do is to sort of line up behind that microphone and ask your question to the panel. It could be to the Premier. He generally directs the traffic of the questions, and then he can refer it off to Professors Spuria and Steer as depending upon the question. From that, we want to sort of move through that quickly so that everybody gets to ask a question. At some point, at my judgment, I'll join the queue, and that's kind of the end of the line, because also we need to respect your evening time and get you out of here on time. So, with that, I will throw over to the Premier, Peter Malinauskas.
Thanks, Rick. Good evening, everyone. Can I start by acknowledging that we're the lands of the Kaurna people, and I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Can I acknowledge all the dignitaries that are here tonight, particularly my parliamentary colleagues. We mentioned Louise Miller-Frost, the local federal member of Parliament, the member for Boothby, but also Sarah Andrews, who's the member for Gibson, represents this local community in the state parliament, and Alex Dighton, who's responsible for the electorate immediately next door as well. But most importantly, can I just thank everybody for coming out on a winter's Tuesday night? It's Tuesday, isn't it? Okay, yes. Because this is an important subject. As a government, we've been quite deliberate in hosting countless different forums across the state, and sometimes they're with an explicit purpose in mind. Other times we just have community and country cabinets. We've done a great number of them. In fact, I had one last night in Port Pirie. But tonight is one that's orientated to a particularly important subject. And while I'm very grateful so many of you turned out tonight, I'm not particularly surprised. And the reason why I say that is because the harmful algal bloom, I think, has captured our attention for good reasons. It is an extremely disconcerting natural disaster. I think in this country we've become familiar with natural disasters, and more often than not they take a form that we understand. A flood, a fire, a drought. These are events that have always occurred. They're occurring with increasing frequency and magnitude, but we understand them. whereas the harmful algal bloom is an entirely new phenomenon to see something occur on this scale and this size. It's important to note that this is not the first algal bloom in Australia. It's not likely to be the last, but it absolutely is without precedent in terms of its size, its scale, and the impact it's having on our marine environment. And you only have to walk down along the beach to know it's real. And for any of you, and I suspect there's a large number, and certainly myself, when you walk along the beach and you see a dead fish, that happens from time to time. But when you see them in significant numbers, and when you see species that you haven't seen lying around on the beach before, and you see a large number of them, I've got to say it's pretty confronting. It's, I don't think you're human if you're not saddened by it. And it raises a lot of questions. It raises questions how much more damage is going on below the surface of the ocean that we don't see. It raises questions around how this has happened, why it's happened. It raises a whole series of questions around, is this a new normal that we now also have to become used to, given the changing climate that is real on our planet? And also, at least for those of us who are concerned about climate change, I think it raises a degree of reflection around, what is the world that we have created here, and it raises questions around, our responsibilities to future generations. I think they're questions we should take really seriously. But when we ask ourselves these questions, I think it's also really important that we find answers based in fact. And, if I'm upfront about it, I think one of the challenges that we've got at the moment in respect to the algal bloom, because it is so new, because it is without precedent, because it generates a lot of curiosity, it also generates an environment that allows misinformation to enter the frame. Sometimes that misinformation comes from sources with other, motives. Other times it's misinformation that's allowed to generate because of the age of social media, and sometimes myths quickly take hold and are hard to debunk, which is why forums like this are just magnificent, because you get to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, from experts on the ground and in the field, and most importantly, you get to interrogate us, the political architecture of the government, but also our officials, our experts, whose advice informs the decisions that we make. And to that end, I'm really looking forward to getting through these presentations and then inviting the Q&A. One thing that I'd just say, which might be a good entree into Professor Mike Steer's presentation, is just a bit of a chronology of how we got here. So this first appeared in Waipinga back in March, and we didn't fully understand what was going on. But as the challenge presented itself and inquiries were made at the highest levels of government, the advice that we were receiving at a cabinet level was, this is an algal bloom. We understand largely what causes algal blooms and what can see to them exacerbate. But, and Michael, I don't want to steal Mike's thunder because he's going to go into a bit of detail, but that in the ordinary course of events, during the course of the cooler months, once we start to get to May and June, probably in May, but certainly by June, the algal bloom will dissipate as water temperatures cool. Here we are at the beginning of August, and that has not yet happened. Now, you would imagine in July, we started asking, certainly by mid-July, we started asking what's going on here. And there are some questions we still don't know the answers to. But what we do know is a few factors are coming together that has seen to the persistence of the algal bloom. We're learning a lot more about Karenia micomytoi, the variant of algae. I'm alive to the fact that in my particular position of responsibility. I'm going to learn a lot along the way. I didn't have learning about Karenia Mickey Moitoi on my bucket list at the beginning of the year, but I am now far more familiar with this little bugger of a thing than I thought I would be. But it is persisting, and that invites questions around what is likely to happen over the months ahead. And they're the sorts of questions that we want to furnish what we know with you tonight. Professor Mike Steer is the Executive Director of SARDI. I don't say this lightly, but in state government we've got a lot of agencies that do a lot of work that seldom gets recognised. If you have something go wrong and you call 000 and the ambulance rolls up, you know the green uniform, you know the blue uniform from police. If you're in a public hospital, you are familiar with nurses and doctors and the work that they do. And we rightly celebrate them and we elevate them in the public discourse and thank them for the work that they do. One of the things when you're lucky enough to be in an office like mine is you get a greater familiarity of the depth of the public service and other functions that aren't often talked about. But that doesn't make them any less important. And in SARDI, we have what is largely recognised, not just around the country but around the world, as one of the most advanced scientific-based research organisation around our marine environment that helps inform really high-quality public policy positions, not always celebrated or congratulated, but has really resulted in our marine environment in South Australia being world-class and clean and well-managed, particularly when we think about the fisheries and the like. Mike is responsible for leading that organisation, and we have been leaning very heavily on SARDI in recent weeks to help guide us through this unprecedented challenge. Everyone in this room would know Professor Nicola Spiria from SA Health. Again, the public health section of SA Health wasn't well understood or known about prior to COVID. Now it's well understood, and people can certainly look to Professor Spiria as a great source of public health advice, which I think is important in this context too. So they'll provide some presentations and then it's over to you. So on that note, can I invite Mike to come to the stage and give a presentation. And if you just lock away your questions in the back of your mind and look forward to asking them. If I can answer them, I will. And in the event that I have absolutely no idea what the answer is, I'll handball to Mike. But he'll give a presentation to start off with, and then we'll hear from Nicola, and then I'll come back to the stage. Can I introduce Mike? Thanks.
Thanks for the introduction. Fantastic to see so many people here, and really good to see some familiar faces as well. Right, let's talk about the fundamental of the biology of the species. When we think about this, we'll have to always boil it back down to the biology and ecology and what our understanding, because that's where a lot of the answers sit. Algae, or phytoplankton, exists naturally in our ecosystem. It's the very beginning of primary production. It's the first link in the food chain across our incredible marine environment. It's there to support high trophic levels, our fisheries, our biodiversity. It's the engine room, the beginning of the engine room of our ecosystem, our marine ecosystems. Now, there'll be thousands of different phytoplankton that sit in this community, and there's a handful of them that are considered harmful. So harmful algal species, or they're called dinoflagellates in these phytoplankton, they're always there. They're part of our ecosystem. And it's only when conditions become good for growth, survival, that you start to see explosions of these harmful blooms in the community. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. The Premier correctly identified the species that we're interested in at the moment, Karenia Mickey Moitoi. This is one of the key algal species that are making up the composition of the algal bloom. It's an incredible critter. It's tiny. It's a microscopic plant. It's a phytoplankton. It's about 0.2 micrometers, which is about a fifth of the size of the diameter of a hair. It can swim. It's got a little tail like a flagellum. It can swim around, so it has some sort of capacity to move through the water column, and it can reproduce very, very quickly. And it feeds on light. It's a plant, right? So it needs to photosynthesize, so light's really important. But it's also able to absorb nutrients in the water column as well, so dissolved inorganic material and organic material, and also feed on microorganisms. So it's quite versatile. It's an incredible versatile creature. And in fact, when conditions aren't right, it's able to actually turn into a cyst and be dormant for a little while. So just sort of sleep for a little minute and wait till the environment changes and it can reproduce again. And I'll talk a little bit about the impacts of that going forward. Part of the reason why it's been such a challenge for us is because it has a negative impact on marine life, particularly any species that have gills that rely on water to breathe, because it effectively harms the gills of the fish. It creates it inhibits the appropriate oxygen flow, so that it's really difficult to a fish to breathe if it's in a large bloom. And also, if these animals or these phytoplankton die really quickly and they decompose, they draw all of the nutrients out of the water, which is also going to impact the breathing of the fish. And some of them, not Corenia micomoti, but there's other Corenia species that sit in this, are able to produce some toxins, and Nicholas Spurrier will talk about that a little bit later. Right, so where the hell did this come from? What actually caused this bloom? There's been 3 unprecedented events that have occurred in our natural ecosystem, and we'll go through these in chronicle order, and you'll remember some of these. First of all, we had the big River Murray flood in 22-23 that pushed all of these nutrients and dead fish into the ocean from the Coorong. You might remember that. Remember seeing all the fish, dead fish lying around Port Elliot, Victor Harbour. An incredible amount of resources and nutrients got flushed into the system, and that just sat in the system and dissolved and decomposed and worked its way through the environment. So that's episode 1. The second thing we saw in the summer of 23-24 is this upwelling. We had this incredible upwelling event. Now, upwelling is a natural thing that happens in South Australia. That's where you get the really cold, deep, nutrient-rich water come up to the surface. And once it comes up to the surface, it hits the sunlight and increases primary productivity, and it really kicks off our fisheries and and starts up our whole system. It's an incredible engine room of productivity in South Australia. And we see that occurring off of Eyre Peninsula, south of Kangaroo Island, and in the Bonnie upwelling. Bonnie upwelling is quite famous for its upwelling system. Now, normally we see this upwelling hang around for a couple of months, but in 23-24 it hung around for an extended period of time. In fact, it's been really good in promoting and ensuring that our fisheries resources, particularly our sardine resources, boom. So there's a really important component of these upwelling systems that happen every year. And then the third thing, the icing on the cake. In September 2024, we realised that we were going through a heat wave, a marine heat wave. And that heat wave extended quite a lot along the way around the southern coast. And it was providing temperatures about 2.5 degrees higher than we've seen for over 40 years. So heaps of nutrients in the water, cold upwelling system that we hadn't seen for many, many years, the persistence, and then the heat that absolutely started to drive the increase in this bloom. Right, so let's look at that visually. This is a really cool map that brings it all together. And this is the work of the oceanographers that operate at the South Australian Research and Development Institute. So in March, remember, March was where we started to hear about surfers in Waitbinga and Parsons Beach getting itchy eyes and seeing dead fish. If you look on that map there in March, and there's a bit of a green smudge. Now this is the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll is the pigment in plants. That we can detect from space. So we've got satellite imagery that gives us an idea of the distribution of that chlorophyll. Not all chlorophyll is harmful, but it gives us a really good indication of where there's likely to be Corenia if it's going to be part of that population. And you can see the purple bubbles there. That represents the cell count. So we've actually gone and tested the water and said, all right, well, we know there's high levels of chlorophyll here, so we know that there's some nutrients and activity. Can we test to see whether we can find this algae species, this Karenia mikimotoi? And we have. We saw it in quite large concentrations. And furthermore, if you look at those little crosses, the little dots rather, that's where we see the dead fish. And there's been an incredible amount of information that we've gone from citizen scientists that are providing us with so much information about when and where these dead fish wash up. And you can see it's all linking up pretty beautifully. And if we track that through time, you can start to see how the chlorophyll is spread, the Karenia densities have shifted, the increases of the dead fish have been recognised, and this is because it's following the oceanographic currents into the Gulf systems, and it will eventually just sort of work its way around the Gulf system there. So an incredible graph that pulls that all together and makes a lot of sense of the situation. So I've already spoken about what is killing the sea life. I'll just reiterate, the algal cells impact the gills of the fish and it compromises the breathing. It depletes the oxygen in the water when the species crashes, when the algae species crashes and blooms again. And it also disrupts the food chain. You've seen how many fish are washing up on the shore. Clearly that's going to have an impact on other species that rely on feeding on those fish. Remember, it's affecting those animals with gills. So what are we doing about it? Well, there's an extensive testing regime that we're doing at the moment. We've got a number of sites along Metropolitan Adelaide and the Coorong that's looking for the different Karenia species in the water samples, and we're testing it weekly. We're also testing the oysters, the mussels, and the pippies that are grown by our South Australian primary producers, our aquaculturalists. Weekly, and we're testing that for levels of Karenia and also levels of brevetoxin to make sure that everything that is available for us as consumers, as South Australia's consumers, is safe to eat. So that weekly testing's ongoing, and if you're interested in doing a deeper dive in that data, jump on the website. All that information is on the algalbloom.sa.gov website, and you'll be able to deep dive into the detail if you're really into that. Okay, so testing and monitoring, just to give you an indication of the distribution of the testing, you can see that Metropolitan Coast and Victor Harbour, they're tested weekly, and that information is updated by the end of the week. We aim to get that information ready for the task force that we're meeting regularly on Thursday, and there's also some other testing occurring around key aquaculture areas around York Peninsula and Port Lincoln. All right, now, I guess if you go back and have a look at that, that distribution map, and you can see where the isolated areas of Karenia has been detected. And what isn't quite apparent at the moment is where it's not. There are vast areas of water and coastline in South Australia where it's unimpacted, hasn't been detected, and it's free of Karenia. So, and we're keeping an eye on that, and you'll be able to access that information on a regular basis too. Right. So what can you do? Well, there's a couple of things that you can do. You can continue to report any fish deaths through Fishwatch, or report any sick or dead wildlife, including marine mammals, through the Emergency Animal Disease Hotline. Once again, all that information is on the website and in the pack provided. Sure, you're going to have heaps of questions. Really looking forward to hearing them later on. But I'll now pass over to Professor Spurrier. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Namani. Mani naglu tumbandi, naglu gana yatanga and parendi, kumatana yaramina nai tumbandi. And this is Ghana land, and as part of this algal bloom, it really impacts our First Nations, our Indigenous people, our Aboriginal people in this state. So it's really important to acknowledge that as well. So yes, you know me as the COVID queen, but public health also covers a range of other areas as well as communicable diseases. And it is responsible for safe drinking water, for safe food, and also safe recreational water for swimming in. So you can see why, and also safe air, I should say. So you can then understand why I'm involved tonight, and I've got a team that's involved, and particularly around food safety. There's a very small but extremely technically competent group of people in the department that make sure that the food that you eat and the food that is sold in our shops in South Australia is safe. And that's why I can stand here tonight and say that all the seafood that's available for sale in South Australia from South Australian waters is absolutely safe. But I want to give you a bit of background so that you can understand all of that. So from a health perspective, as I see it, there's three main issues, and I'm going to step those through. The first issue is around walking on a beach and swimming in a beach and the symptoms that you know people have been complaining about. The second is the fact that, as Mike said, some of these algal species produce a toxin, a brevitoxin, and that's about the seafood safety, the food safety. And the third thing I do want to talk about is actually what impact this has on people's mental health. Because when you walk along the beach, and I've done the same, and it's a beach that I've loved for many years since I was a little girl, and see dead animals there, it is really terribly sad. And when we understand that our climate is warming up and that this is an impact of climate change, you can understand that we feel deeply worried and sad about it, as do our young people. So we've got to think about people's mental health, and it was wonderful to have Tammy Allen here tonight, our Mental Health Commissioner, because that's one of the things that we're very keen to do, is make sure that we've got mental health supports for people. So look, let's have a look at the slides. So as I said, the first thing I'm going to talk about is advice for being on a beach. Beaches are beautiful. I'm a scuba diver. I love being on the beach. I've also taken up triathlons, can you believe? And that involves, swimming in the ocean. And I've got a real interest and understand why people want to be on a beach. So what I can say is you can go to a beach and you can enjoy the beaches in South Australia, despite the fact that we do have this algal bloom, and I'll explain why. So the main species, as you've heard from the Premier and from Mike, is Karenia mikimotoi. It does not produce a toxin, and when I say a toxin, I mean a chemical substance that gets in your body and damages those cells. What it does do, though, is when it gets broken up, and you saw that lovely picture that Mike showed you, when it breaks up, it causes little sharp edges of particles, and it's actually those little sharp things that get in the seawater and the sea spray, and as you're walking along the beach, and I'm sure some of you here have experienced this on a local beach, it will make you have a sort of slightly irritated throat, maybe some itchy eyes, a bit of irritation in your eyes, and might make you start coughing. It's an irritant effect. And one of my team here, Chris Lees, is here tonight, and he said, as an example of that, think about pepper. And you know how the police will use pepper spray? It's an irritant. It doesn't get into your body, and it isn't a toxin and doesn't cause long-term damage. But we know that those symptoms have been occurring for people, but I can absolutely reassure you there's no toxin involved. It is an irritant, and when you go away from the beach, those symptoms will disappear. If you happen to go in the water and there's a lot of the algae there, you'll also get itchy skin. Again, get out of the water and wash it off with clean water, and those symptoms will resolve. I've got a couple of examples. Somebody told me recently that their husband went swimming and there was a lot of brown discoloration, there was a lot of the foam. And we know when you see that, that's the area to avoid, because we know that's where the algae is. Anyway, those symptoms were quite severe for this gentleman, and it actually took about 2 days for them to resolve. So if you've had a really big exposure of this irritant, you can imagine that your skin's got quite inflamed, and it will take a bit longer to settle down. But if you've just had a small amount, and then, again, I'm only going to give Chris as the example, was walking down around Middleton, and suddenly was totally fine, walking along the beach, totally fine, then suddenly started coughing. Turned around, walked away, and the coughing went away. You couldn't see it, but it was obviously in the spray, the sea spray. And then as you go away, symptoms resolve. So no long-term harmful impacts from that. So as it says on the slide. So that's the first problem. And the way to avoid that is if you see the brown discoloration and the foam, I think we have a picture coming up of that, or at least it is in the booklet or on one of the other slides. Just avoid those areas. You might be totally fine walking, and it will depend on the wind, because if you've got a wind coming off the sea, you're going to be more exposed. If the wind's going the other way, unlikely you'll get exposed. And if there's no wind at all, again, probably won't have any symptoms. And if you see that in the water, those are the places not to swim in. Now, oh, sorry, I've got it here. So if the water's clear and not foamy, totally swimming's fine. So you don't have to think just because there's been dead fish in the water, it's dangerous for humans. Most humans that I've seen and examined don't have gills, all right? So you're not going to be impacted the way the fish are. You're going to be fine. And as I said, avoid the contact with that discoloured water or foam. So the second thing I wanted to talk to you about was the seafood safety. So absolutely everything that is purchased in shops is totally fine, because we have a very vigorous testing regime for the one thing that we know comes from algae, and that's called a brevetoxin. And there's been a very, very long-standing testing regime for brevetoxin in our seafood. And the things that we test are the things that are filter feeders, which are the shellfish that have two shells. And that's because filter feeders accumulate things because they have a lot of water coming through. They filter, and they will accumulate the brevetoxin. Now, I like to give the example of pearls because they are my favourite jewellery. I've got my pearls on tonight. And you know the oyster, it makes the pearl because it's a bivalve, it's a filter feeder, and that's how it produces the pearl. Those are the parts of seafood that we know can have the brevetoxin, but I'm reassuring you that we have a great testing regime, so anything that you buy in the store. I enjoyed oysters last week, so did the Premier. I'm looking forward to mussels this week, for example. It's going to be absolutely safe. In terms of going out fishing, I haven't been fishing for many years, but I do enjoy it. If you're a keen fisher and you want to go fishing, absolutely fine. Catch a fish, you can totally eat it. Same with the crabs, the prawns, the lobster and squid. What we are recommending though is that you clean those thoroughly, because if there is ever going to be any brevetoxin, it's going to be because that fish might have eaten a mollusk or a shellfish and might have a little bit in their intestine. So we're saying discard that. So as per the slide, the flesh of all of those things are fine. So go for it if you're catching fish. The one thing that we are telling people to avoid, so that's out of all of the seafood we've talked about in our state, the only thing to avoid is if you are self-collecting those bivalves plus abalone. So your scallops and cockles, pippies, etc. Those bivalves are the two shells. We're saying they're not safe only because we're not out there testing them the way we do it for our aquaculture industry. Now we do have the chief vet here, Skye Fruin, who helped me put this slide together, because one of the things we get in SA Health is a lot of questions about the pets. And again, I want to be able to reassure you that you can take your dog for a walk. This doesn't look like my dog, but the other photograph of someone walking a dog looks exactly like my border collie, and I'm absolutely fine taking my dog on the beach. We know that people have heard stories that could be dangerous, but again, dogs don't have gills, and they are going to be very much like humans. So dogs might also get a bit of irritation if you start coughing. We've heard lots of dogs sneezing, for example. If you start coughing, your dog starts sneezing, it's that irritant effect of the Carenia micomotoi. The other thing that dogs do, we don't really do this as humans, is go and stick our noses into things, particularly dead and decomposing fish, especially very smelly ones. And if your dog doesn't eat it, it might actually start rolling in it instead. So all of that may just expose, as it's rolling in it, to additional little bits of those particles and irritate the skin. But actually eating the decomposing fish is not the brevetoxin I'm worried about. It's a decomposing fish, and anyone or any dog that ate that is likely likely to get a bit of a tummy upset, so we would suggest avoiding that because we know that there has been a lot of dead marine life. And then again, same as humans, if your dog, because dogs don't always do what they're told, dashes into that foam, that brown discoloured water, and dashes in there and comes out, don't panic, it will be absolutely fine, just wash it off with some fresh water afterwards, and that irritant effect will disappear. And finally, of course, as in humans, if we have ongoing symptoms, we suggest see your doctor with your pets and your dog to go and see the vet. And I do want to finish on this wellbeing advice, and Tammy, you're here right at the front, and Tammy will be around afterwards if you want to talk to her. And as I said, we can feel stressed about this. It's actually normal to feel stressed when you have situations like this. Goodness, look at what happened with the pandemic. We had a lot of people feeling very stressed about what was going to happen. And one of the best things to do is to be able to talk to somebody, so don't hold it in. And find somebody that you trust, talk to people in your family, and if you don't have somebody like that you can talk to, there is professional help, and we've got some of those contact numbers there. Local councils also can provide forums and support and community events, and actually as part of, and the Premier will talk about some of the things the government is doing, but we are looking forward to holding more community events to bring people together to provide that additional support, which is so important. Young people, I've got 3 adult children, and this is something that stresses them. So again, think about the young ones in your lives and give them, listen to them and support them. One thing that I have said to my kids is take the news apps off your phone, because sometimes you get overloaded by this negative information. And I met Jane Goodall last year, which was a wonderful experience. She said to me, you must have hope, because if people don't have hope, you get apathetic, and then nothing changes. You know, things don't improve. So, and I think she has a message for young people in that regard. And asking for help early makes a big difference. So many of us are sort of keep the stiff upper lip and we'll be fine, mate. But it's better to go and ask for help if you need it. And as I said, Tammy will be here afterwards if you wanted to talk to her. So that's my rundown of all of the health impacts, and very happy to talk to you later and also to answer some of the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nicola. I want to very quickly just touch on the work that the government is doing, and then we'll open it up to questions. So in terms of the government response, if there was something we could do to make the algal bloom disappear, we would have done it already. Clearly, this is a challenge that doesn't have it's not like a fire, you can simply put it out. So what we have to turn our minds to, what are the things that we can actually do that will make a meaningful difference? And there are a few areas of contemplation in respect to the policy challenge we want to confront. So this just quickly summarises the work that we're doing. First thing is we've got to better understand this and invest in the science and research. Science, can deliver us a lot of clarity and confidence around the appropriate policy response. We want to understand, we're investing in a whole range of measures, but these are the top lines. First thing, we want to understand exactly the scale of the damage to our biodiversity below the ocean surface. So there is a rapid marine impact assessment that is being undertaken, that is being led by SARDI in conjunction with the Department of Environment and Water. That is complex and difficult, particularly at this time of the year, but work that has been undertaken nonetheless. SARDI has already led the world in developing a technology which was deployed some time ago, where we have a remote buoy out in the Gulf that is able to monitor and detect the water, including to be able to detect Karenia algae. That has proven to be quite a useful resource. What we're now doing is dramatically scaling that up. It's a technology that we developed as a state, and we are now heavily investing in it because it's been exceptionally useful. It takes a whole range of real-time monitoring efforts. It can look at the oceanography, combine it with satellite imagery to tell us more about what is happening with the algae. Exceptionally valuable. A national testing laboratory in South Australia. This speaks to the brevetoxin. As Professor Spieria articulated, the brevetoxin, that won't be in the flesh of the fish that you catch or that we eat, but we see it in the bivalves or in the oysters, abalone and mussels. To provide a bit of context, we've got, make sure I get my numbers right here, because it's always monitoring. There are 323 oyster growers in this state, or licensed areas of where we grow the oysters. 22 of them have been impacted, which represents another challenge. But 7% of our oyster growers have had a detection of brevitoxin. We detect that by taking the oyster samples and sending it to a laboratory in New Zealand, which is the only place that has the capability of doing that. That's not particularly efficient. We're investing in building that capability that SARDI is leading right here in South Australia. It'll be the first in the nation. That's something we're working on. Just quickly on the oysters. That's not a bad segue to one of the bigger challenges that we've got here, and that's the misinformation issue. 27% of our coastline has been affected, and it's bloody tragic. But 73% of our coastline is unaffected. Only 7% of our oyster growers have been impacted, but people aren't buying oysters. For every other oyster grower that isn't impacted, for our mussel producers, for our seafood producers, for coastal communities on the 73% of the unaffected coastline, they are now seeing either a downturn in sales or engagement from us as members of the community. And it's important that while we recognise the severity of and the tragedy of this, that we don't artificially inflate it in people's minds so as to do more damage than what otherwise is necessary, or that can otherwise be avoided by simply being aware of the fact that, hey, it's still okay to go to the Eyre Peninsula. Hey, please do buy the oysters. Response plan. So we are working, this might not be the last time this happens, and it also might persist into the summer, which is a pretty disconcerting proposition. We acknowledge that if the algal bloom were to exacerbate over summer, or even persist over summer, that will elevate the severity of the challenge and require yet more of a response from government in a range of different areas. So we are working on a summer plan in that regard, and that work is happening in earnest. I hope it's a plan that we develop, put in the top drawer, and never have to use. But we have to, hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Communications, we're going to do countless forums like this. This is the first. It's the first because of, we're having the first one here because of Sarah. I don't mind saying, your local MP said, if we're having forums, I want the first in Brighton, so here we are. But we're doing countless of these around the state, and we're going to be ramping up public information campaigns, including television advertising and the like. A community fund. In terms of community support, this has been used for any number of different purposes. For instance, rec fishing. We're seeing rec fishing fall off in terms of participation. That's heartbreaking for families that see this as a healthy pastime. My view, anything that gets a kid off a screen or a phone, that's a good thing. Fishing is one of those activities we want people to participate in. More than that, it's actually very important economically. I was chatting to a fishing charter operator in Port Victoria who was sharing the pain that people in Port Victoria are experiencing, notwithstanding the fishing has never been better, as it was described to me only on Saturday night when I spoke to this bloke. The fishing tackle store and everyone else being hurt. So we're working with Recfish SA to do a range of things. Fishing competitions, investing in reefs, which is really important as well, because investing in the environmental recovery here is going to be essential. We can do things to accelerate the recovery of the amazing biodiversity that we've got of our coastline by investing in reefs as well as the research. Funding the cleanup of the beach is important, and then we've also announced industry support packages for those that have been directly impacted economically or commercially, whether you're an oyster grower or whether or not you're a caravan park operator in Ardrossan. So these are the types of measures that we're investing in and leaning in quite heavily to ramp up and accelerate its rollout as best as we possibly can. Some things will take, we can get the industry support out the door, but establishing a brevitoxin testing regime in the state doesn't happen overnight, although we are moving at warp speed. But the one thing that I think represents the biggest challenge is making sure that we do everything we can to actually support the marine environment in its recovery when this moves on, whenever that might be. It's probably the most important thing that we do. And, whether it be in investing in the reefs or the research or the science, I think that's going to have to be an effort that is maintained for a period of time that well exceeds the life of this algal bloom. And I think there's one thing that's come out of this. I was trying to find a silver lining to this event, and that's pretty hard. It would be, I think it's reminded each and every one of us about how fortunate we are in the state to enjoy an extraordinary coastline with one of the most biodiverse marine environments that exists anywhere in the world that is largely pristine. Right? If this happened in other parts of the world where people don't treat it as preciously as we do, probably wouldn't surprise us on the television sets, but the fact it's happening here, where we care about it so much, is shocking, but it helps elevate just how important it is that we invest in the effort, particularly the science. On that note, it's probably a good time to hand over to you. We've got a bit of time here, so I'm not too sure. There's a mic coming up over here. Now having done countless numbers of these, there's a little moment of awkward pause where I have to fill the air with random commentary as I wait for someone to come and line up behind the microphone and ask the first question. Anyone that wants to do us the service of asking the first question wins a prize. Just line up behind the mic. The reason why we get you to line up is it sort of regulates the process. And here we go. Now, we're away. So the only thing you have to do, only rules of engagement, is just your name and maybe your suburb. You don't have to give us your last name if you don't want. And try not to monopolise it with a story. Just the sooner you can get to your question, the more questions we can get to.
Premier, I love where you ended. My name is Philippa. I've come down from Green Hill, halfway up towards Mount Lofty. I'd be really interested, having watched Ocean with Attenborough, that he managed to end that with an upnote about how quickly oceans can recover. It would be fantastic to get information to people to prepare for the moment when Coronias drop, that we can start to work to rebuild habitats and restock them. Can I throw that to you?
Yes. Well, Mike will be able to speak to this with a bit of authority.
Oh, hang on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? That's a great question, and it really highlights the importance of how the marine ecosystem and how the marine environment supports not only our biodiversity, which we are incredibly proud of here in South Australia, but also in our fisheries resources. So you're right, it's intimately linked, and that's why I like some of the investment into the reef regeneration, for example. That's a fantastic idea, because not only does that stimulate growth of new oyster species, like the native oysters, that'll help filter the water and clear it up, but it also provides incredible structure and habitat for a range of species that we gain incredible value about. Whether it's through diving and looking at them, whether it's through an appreciation, they're just there doing their role in the environment, or whether it's supporting recreational fishing or a number of other things that we value. So you're absolutely right. They're very much intimately linked between the health of the ocean, the health of the environment, and the productivity that we see as a consequence.
G'day, my name's Troy. Been playing in the ocean out here for 50 years. Question, Mike, have we done any research about what happened in 64 at Coffin Bay with the same sort of algal bloom?
In 64. Now, look, I know my hair's going a little bit grey, but it's a little bit...
Have you seen if you found any old pros over there who could tell you what happened?
So there's an incredible... First of all, we did have a similar algal bloom in Coffin Bay in 2014, and we learnt a little bit from that as well. And that hung around for a few months, and like the Premier said, this is an unprecedented situation where we've got such a large and persisting bloom. But your point about the generations of knowledge that sit in the commercial industry and the communities. They provide effectively a Wikipedia to support our research. You know, it's not like one person does something in isolation here to come up with these scientific solutions. There's an incredible team and corporate knowledge and generations of knowledge that gets filtered up. So you raise a really good point there, thank you.
The second one is we have thought about perhaps trying to dump some water out of the reservoirs to try and drop the ocean temperature to try and combat the algal. Or, you know, when you go to do your research, fill up full of ice and go start dumping it in the sea. You've got to do something to drop the temp. It has come down 2.5 degrees in the last couple of months. You can obviously see it on my sounder, and it's come down from 15.9 to 12.9. But let's get it lower.
Well, that's great, and it's good that you're picking up on that, because there's probably a number of things that this species likes, like sunlight, nice clear days, you know, when that makes sense. It likes warm temperature, right? That makes sense. And it likes nutrients, and that makes sense too, right? So if we start taking some of those things away, whether environmental processes do it, then we would expect to see that population decline. But look, I love your ideas.
Can I just talk about dumping the reservoirs?
And filling them up with desal plant.
Glad you raised it. So the desal plant was actually turned off some time ago because we've had a bit of rain. Not as much as we'd like in other areas of the state. But when we got to, I'm just trying to remember exactly when it was, but it was sometime around about early May. No, it was probably more April actually. We started getting advice in Cabinet because the Minister for Water was giving us a bit of an update about the fact that the desal plant was coming on, which also was without precedent, as it turns out. That's a coincidence, by the way. The desal plant made no contribution to the algal bloom, and Mike can speak as a bit of authority, but it's worth just mentioning since it's been raised. In fact, the Corinium micimoitoi doesn't perform as well in saline waters, which is a bit counterintuitive to the conspiracy theories that have been promulgated by some. But the reason why I'd be reluctant about emptying reservoirs is because we need every last drop of drinking water we can get. The cheapest and most affordable form of drinking water is the stuff that falls out of the sky, and every time we increase reservoir capacity, it's important. If we lost that, that would be...
But how much does the seafood industry worth?
It's worth a lot. It's worth a lot, but it wouldn't work anyway. But even if it would work, I'm not going to unplug our drinking water because that's worth a bit too. Yeah. But I appreciate the thought.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Alana. I'm a mum and a high school science and English teacher. Since early June, I've documented over 50 species of dead marine life dust on this small stretch of beach here between Seacliff and South Brighton.
Yeah.
The stormwater outlets really stink in that area. My question is there going to be some money allocated to community environmental groups to improve the quality of the stormwater entering our Gulf? With like natural water filtering plants and more wetland environments to filter that water.
I'm not sure if there's anyone that wants to take that. I'm happy to, since I'm not seeing any hands up. So the short answer is that one of the purposes of the community fund, sorry, it's not on here, but on the one of the purposes of the community fund I referred to is indeed to partner with local science organisations, but also environmental groups, to participate in any activity that gives us the capacity to improve our marine environment, right? Whether that's associated with the algal bloom or not. And there's a degree of flexibility around that, and we're open to all suggestions. We've taken a number on already. In respect to SA Water, who I don't think is on our panel, but in fact, we've got someone here from Jew. Yes, of course. I find, should I handle this earlier?
Yeah, I was going to say those sorts of projects will all help in terms of reducing nutrients into our waterways as a bigger program, and certainly organisations like Green Adelaide can assist with some of those sorts of projects as well. So yeah, it'd be well worth investigating further if you've got an interest in that sort of thing.
Thank you, Lisa.
Hi, my name's Casey from Taparoo. I also represent a non-profit coastal group. I guess follow on from the previous question, there was a lot of info about data collection and different projects that can be taken on. I guess my question is, what's considered the priority for the next 6 to 12 months from community groups to be able to support with the marine restoration and the general environment restoration?
Michael, Lisa, you were...
Right, okay, the priority. So one of the priorities that was mentioned earlier is around understanding the impact and measuring the impact of this harmful algal bloom on our biodiversity and our marine resources. What we've seen when this started in March was an incredible army of citizen scientists that were collecting fantastic information, both spatially and temporally around the state, and documenting all the different species that were encountered. That's remarkable information to help us consider in understanding the impact. So eyes on the ground and feeding back through the appropriate channels is going to help. That's good data. That would continue to be a key priority. The other priorities that we would see is around, I guess, fundamentally understanding what the biology is and the impact of the harmful algal bloom. So the eyes, ears across South Australia is priceless. So thank you.
Warwick Noble, I live at Merino. I know some of the members on the panel here. Great work on getting this information out there and the work that's going on with the monitoring of things. Premier, as you noted in your introduction, there's a whole lot of stresses on the system that are continuing over time. This is just the latest indication of that stress that's on the system. Looking at the monitoring network and things that have been done through SARDI, a lot of that is remote sensing. We do have some buoys out there to do that sort of stuff. The monitoring locations have been along the coastlines. We have gliders out there from IMOS that have been tasked. They tend to be 40 metres of water to really operate at their optimum, which is kind of out to the mouth of the Gulfs. Crewed missions are expensive. You've got to respect the time and the skills of the people that are going out and doing these sorts of things. So typically you'd be spending at least half of your money on research would be going into your staff, crewing staff, which then decreases the amount of samples that you can process. So it appears to me that there's a gap in our monitoring systems here that we can fill with the technology that's available, renewably powered uncrewed vessels that can be out there persistently monitoring our gulfs and can fill that gap between that 40 metres and that coastal area and the crewed area. These sorts of things have been used on all around the world, but particularly on the Great Barrier Reef. These would go on persistently over time, continue to give us the data that we need, and help us understand the recovery in the system. Do you see that that South Australia deserves this sort of monitoring network, this addition that's available and can fill those gaps for us?
Good to see you, Warwick. Absolutely, and you raised some really important points. So we do have investment in oceanographic monitoring infrastructure that's coordinated through the South Australia Research and Development Institute. We do link into the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy scheme through IMOS, and that's starting to really lift up some investment in that coastal area. We do engage with our incredible fisheries network where we actually are able to use commercial vessels to collect data for us, so that's another way of trying to cut some of those costs. We've just had an announcement for a new research vessel. You know, the Nagaran, you've probably been on it. It's just hanging around. We've got a new research vessel that the state government is investing in that we want to keep with all this stuff. And there are incredible amount of toys out there. You know, the oceanographic sensing technology is just increasing exponentially. And where we can find things that are going to do things remotely for us and save money is a very good investment. Conversations are already happening around some of the ways of supplementing our static mooring system with more autonomous systems. We've got key partnerships with the universities, Adelaide University and Flinders Uni, that have amazing brains in robotics, AI and machine learning that we're tapping into. Amazing stuff ahead, so thank you very much for raising that.
Thank you.
From our perspective, and I think for the answer, we are, as a government, we are having a deliberately open mind to opportunities that might exist to advance the ways we can learn. I think this sort of demonstrates the value of science. We've obviously announced a pretty substantial initial package in terms of new money. That's on top of other investments we already have been making with SARDI. But there's a few different ideas around new technology that have been presented to us, and they always emerge in a crisis. And every time there's been a bushfire, I've had emails about companies who can do AI monitoring to predict fire modelling and all sorts of different things. And lots of times it's actually really valuable, and some of them we've ended up taking up. That'll happen here too. And I guess as a government we have to be open-minded to it, particularly where it can result in productive outcomes. I mean, it might mean more taxpayers' money, but it also might mean the better use of taxpayers' money, and we should be alive to all those possibilities.
Thank you. I would also like to say there are a couple of mitigation measures to try and drop that algal bloom, the existing algal bloom, out of the system.
Yes.
And I believe that the HAP task
There are active work underway in at least one of those, and Mark and I were just talking about it today.
Excellent. Thank you all very
Cheers.
much.
Hi, my name is Jackie and I am a member of this community and also a mum. I've been part of this community for 35 years and know a number of you here, and just want to first of all acknowledge the collective grief and concern and also the massive hard work going on here. I'm also the founder and director of Wild Earth Oceania, and we are Australia's wildlife film festival. We put on Sir David Attenborough's film Ocean to 350 state government and business leaders. Thank you, Ju, for the sponsorship. We're very grateful to be responding to this crisis as we did to the bushfires. We're a global organisation that stands shoulder to shoulder with the United Nations, federal and state government, and dozens of NGOs. I have a comment, and then I have a question for Ju and Mike, and one for Nicola, please. And the first thing is just a massive thank you. Premier, I acknowledge how difficult and how suddenly this has happened. Thank you for your hard work. I'm aware of what's going on behind the scenes, and you have your own family. Thank you very much. The next thing I would like to ask is about the cyanobacteria. So, Carenia mikimoto, which we've all learned to say, does not produce a brevetoxin. Yeah, and so I think, and as you've alluded to, there's a lot of people talking and there's a lot of people really concerned and a lot of people with health irritation and breathing difficulties, myself included, and it's been a shock. Do you know, and can I just ask an open question, do you know what blue-green algae are causing the brevetoxins in the shellfish?
It's an excellent question.
That is a great question, because there was a bit of a disconnect, right? Mikimoto doesn't produce it, but we're seeing brevetoxin, so what's going on there? And remember when I opened up, if you were still awake, and I indicated that there is a heap of different species that sit in that community structure, and the Carenias, they all look really similar, right? And if you look under a microscope, there's only a handful of people, I think, in Australia that can probably differentiate them by eye. You've got to send them off and you've got to get them genetically tested. We're starting to get some results back to say, well, there's probably other smaller players in the community. you know, we've only just learnt how to say Mickey Motoy. There's a couple of others that I'm not really going to have an attempt at saying at the moment, because I'm still going to learn how those ones. It's not brevis.
Okay.
No, it's not brevis. It's a couple of different species. So, in the science package, one of the first things that we see as a pillar of work is to understand the community structure, understand the dynamics in the bloom, and understand under which sort of parameters, salinity, heat, whatever, enact brevitoxin production.
Yeah.
We're at that stage at the moment. There's hot off the press
Yeah,
results
sure.
just came in yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. So acknowledging that this is a dynamic and evolving situation, Nicola, do you have concern about the brevitoxin and the impact on human health?
No. Okay, so
Why?
yeah, because if we look internationally at other countries,
Yeah.
say Florida for example, and you might be aware of that, they've had these very extensive algal blooms for well over 25 years, even longer than that. And they've had 5 to 10 years of really doing a lot of investigation around health. They actually do have the algae, the Corenia brevis, and that does make a brevitoxin.
Yeah.
They actually, in their community, have very similar symptoms, however, which is the direct irritant effect.
Yes.
The only difference that I understand from my team, who have been, of course, communicating with people in Florida, is that because there is the toxin, people who have pre-existing conditions such as asthma, it seems as though their asthma may well be triggered, and it's likely it's because of that toxin. But we don't have that species here. So I'm actually very comfortable knowing the work that's already been done.
Yeah.
The bit that is, and we're not hiding this at all, is of course in the seafood. And as I said, I can reassure people, because we do this testing, it's been very long standing, of the shellfish. It's only if you're going to pick it up yourself. So it doesn't mean we're not going to keep looking, and we're not going to just turn a blind eye. Clearly, we're going to be doing that. And just to say, you know, when I was hearing Mike talk about sending off for genomics and different species, sounded a bit like COVID. And you know, then we got Delta. We thought that was going to be bad, and then we got Omicron. So things do change with time, and I think that's important for people to know that as a group, we're working together as a team, we're sharing information, we're also looking internationally and making sure that the information we provide is the best information we can, because at the end of the day, you're our population, we care about you, we don't want you to get harmed.
Yeah, thank you for that. In terms of the brevitoxins and what you're seeing unfold real time, I am also a healthcare professional. I've been a healthcare professional for 15 years before I moved into this position in Walter Oceania. So I'm hearing a lot from GPs. Over 2,000 patients seen at Kingston Family Clinic, and also at Victor Harbour, that have been calling saying the numbers have really escalated. For myself personally, I've been measuring my lung volume. I live 600 metres from the beach. It has dropped. It dropped by 1/3, and it hasn't cleared up. So I'm wearing a face mask. In openness, I'm taking an antihistamine. I've been taking a nebulizer because I can't breathe. And I do have real concerns. I'm a fit, healthy woman, and it would be great to see open, continued communication between GPs who I'm wondering whether they're actually reporting.
Yes, no, I can talk about that as well, because we have a very strong relationship with the Royal Australasian College of GPs. I talk on a frequent, we're frequently talking about all sorts of things, vaccination, the algal bloom and such like.
Yeah.
If you have a look at our website, we have now some fact sheets. I was told by my team, the comms team, you've written them at a very high reading level for, you had to have a PhD apparently to read it, but they're actually for our health professionals, because we wanted to give them more detailed information around this particular condition. We do get GPs from time to time who ring about all sorts of things, but to actually tell you the truth, and they have my number, they can get hold of me, they've got my email, we haven't actually had many GPs calling us about this. I can't talk to you about your own personal health problems, but just encourage you to keep seeing your GP and making sure that you're having evidence-based care.
Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much.
just another affirmation. Thank you so much for all of your management and all of your hard work. All much appreciated.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Hello, my name is Rebecca. I'm based at Seacliff and I have previously worked supporting research. And my question is around predicting and looking ahead. So are we looking into the next 6 months? We've got summer coming up, lots of questions, how far out? I went to a talk at Flinders Uni on Thursday and you know they were saying it's going to be here for the long term. And also what predictive modelling can we do? Like if I go down the beach tomorrow, how many fish will I see?
Yeah.
So I don't need to go down the beach.
You sound like me 2 months ago, certainly a few weeks ago. Yeah, Mike, what predictions you got for us, mate?
So, in the past couple of meetings I've had with the Premier, he's asked me when's this going to disappear. Right? I can't answer that at the moment. Now, let's go back to the biology, remember? So we've got a species that thrives with light, temperature, nutrients, and when things don't go its way, it turns to assist for a little bit, and it can hang around for a little while, and then things come back into bloom. So we're seeing this bloom pulse. You know, it's like every now and again we go, oh, it's declining, and then some will come, oh, jeez, it's come back again. So we're tracking it that way. Eventually the system is going to get to a situation where it's either going to run out of nutrients naturally because all the phytoplankton will then get fed or feed the zooplankton, which feed the fish, etc. We'll get to a stage where it will hit temperatures and salinities that don't sit within that thermal or salinity range of that species and it won't thrive. And then another a species will potentially take over. However, more information first. We need to track this. We're continuing to monitoring it. We're looking at satellite imagery twice a week. We've got predictive modelling through the oceanography to see where we expect it to go. We're trying to get an understanding of the preparedness. So I'm not going to answer that question at this stage.
And that's an important point because I think part of our responsibility is to make sure that we're furnishing the South Australian community with all the information we have, be honest about everything we do know, and then be honest about what we don't, right? Because, you know, all of us, and when we contemplate everything from budget and fiscal implications right through to environmental impact to thinking about how we prepare for the summer, we just don't know at this point in time. So I guess we, from my perspective, at a high-end public policy level, we just have to be doing everything we can to prepare for all eventualities. But be honest with people that we don't know how this is going to play out, right? We looked to Wellington Bay in New Zealand where there was a similar algal bloom which came, lasted longer than they expected, but then went and then didn't return. And there are other examples, like on the eastern coast of the United States, where the algal bloom came, it went off Florida, and then has persistently returned periodically. So, you know, and there have been other events that we're looking to around the world. So, but everything, you know, every environmental set of conditions is different. The geography here is different. We enjoy different oceanographic movements. Well, it's hard to predict how this is going to play out. And if you hear someone provide you with an absolutely definitive prediction, I'd invite you to get them to write it down so they can't change their position in 2 weeks' time, because I've seen some evidence of that.
I understand that, and I've done
Yeah.
financial forecasting myself, but it does help the community. When
Of
you say
course.
we're looking ahead for the next 6 months.
Of course.
This is what we think could happen.
But
And then move on.
precisely, and these are the same questions that we're asking. And you know, you correct me, Mike, if how I paraphrase this is not accurate. But there is every possibility that during the course of August, this thing, and the word that I've heard used is collapse. Like it could collapse. But there's also every possibility that we face the prospect that during summer we face a more difficult set of conditions than we do now. Nothing can be ruled out, which is why we've got to prepare for the worst and continue to hope for the best. But the one thing that is going to matter more than hope here, and I've got plenty of it, is that we follow the science. Right? There are plenty of examples of where governments globally have ignored the science, and we do it at our peril. Right? The science will guide us here, and we should invest in that effort, which is what we're doing.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kat Heinrich. I'm a Brighton resident and also a co-owner of a circular economy business here in Summerton Park. My question's maybe a little bit of a tricky one. It's got to do with nitrogen. So last night I went to the Liberal forum about this particular issue because I wanted to hear all different aspects.
Of course.
And one of the presenting scientists was talking about nitrogen as a key feeder of the algae bloom. And he was talking about that a lot of the nitrogen comes from runoff, from upstream. We're part of the Murray-Darling Basin. And in order to really address this in the long term, not just thinking about the short term, how do we respond to this particular event, but how do we actually prevent future algae blooms happening? We've got to stop it at its source. So my question is this being considered by the government? And if so, how? What conversations are happening with our interstate jurisdictions? Do we know how much nitrogen is coming from? Yeah, I'm keen to understand.
Well, might invite Michael or Elysium.
You're right, absolutely right. Nitrogen and phosphorus are the key elements that are really contributing to the nutrient loading that the algae is thriving. And we mentioned those, the upwelling event and very clear understanding of the amount of material that came through the floods. We also have nitrogen inputs locally, you're right. We have a runoff, natural runoff. We have dying seagrasses that go through natural processes that produce nitrogen. And they exist and they happen every year, right? It's just part of our natural system. So in terms of the contribution to the overwhelming load of organic material that's helping to fuel this Carinian species, you're right. There's a whole heap of collaboration, a whole heap of contributing factors. In terms of what the state is doing, I'd have to defer to SA Water on that one, Premier. But you raise a true and valid point.
Is there anything June? Is there anything you could add on that or not? Not so much. Yeah.
Not at this stage, but
So,
I think it's worth exploring a bit
yeah.
more.
So the point around nitrogen, as I understand it, and again, you correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong because I'm not a scientist, but the nitrogen that is part of the nutrient mix that the algae is feeding off of, much of it, if not the overall majority of it, is there through natural means, including from the flood event in 22-23, which only has a precedent since records have been kept, was in 1956. So, but in terms of your question, and I hope I've understood your question correctly, your question is to what extent does human activity up and down the River Murray or the Murray-Darling Basin contributed to the volume of nutrients we now see in the water? I think
That's part of the question.
Yeah.
And the scientists last night said we really don't know, and the studies haven't been done. So I don't know if you have different
Well, we
information.
might take that on notice because that's a question worthy of examination.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Hi everyone, thank you Premier and Nicola and Mike for your presentations, and informative as always. I know some of you personally. My question picks up where the last question I left off. It's about nitrogenous pollution. I noticed in your presentation, Mike, you showed a few hotspots that we haven't talked about tonight, like Boston Bay or closer to Port Lincoln. Obviously that's the heartland for the tuna ranching industry. And what's not widely known and understood is that's the largest direct nitrogenous pollution source or contributor in the state. And the reason we don't know about that is because it's all hidden from view quite intentionally. There's a special industry-wide exemption from the national reporting of that particular industrial activity. It's shameful. I've raised this with the Premier previously.
That's right. That was at Burnside.
It was, yeah, that's right.
Norwood, my router. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. I thought this will come back to me. Yes.
Yeah. So my question, coming back to the issue at hand, obviously there's a pollution disclosure issue which dovetails with the previous question. I'd be happy to discuss that with anyone here tonight in greater detail. But my question is, to what extent has there been a local contribution from that industry to those problems that we're detecting in the Boston Bay area? And how's the general perhaps this is a question for Gavin, how's the general health of the finfish aquaculture sector? Have they been reporting fish mortalities or other animal health problems in recent times? And what's the news from that sector?
So that, Michael, Gavin, I'll defer to you, Mike, to start with, and then you can choose.
Yes, good to see you, Dan. Yes, there are, like I said before in the previous answer, there have been numerous cumulative effects in terms of the nitrogen loading, but in terms of the details around the aquaculture activities, I will defer to Gavin to answer this question.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. As you know, so the aquaculture industry is well managed, is well monitored. There is a requirement in terms of looking at the effects that aquaculture has. And it is something that we do look at. In terms of has there been any unusual mortalities within the wild cage pens out in the oceans? No, not at this point in time. And in fact, one of the things, we were keeping pretty close contact with the industry to see, what was happening there. Because we know if the bloom did get across into that area, there's significant numbers of fish there and there would have been significant mortalities. We did make it, we worked with the industry, particularly the tuna industry, to enable them to move some of their pens out of the way, which enabled them to effectively finish off their harvest. So that harvest is pretty much done for tuna. Kingfish, similarly, they are there all year round, as you know. And again, there's levels of stocking and there's monitoring that occurs within, in terms of what those impacts may be. We take that stuff really, really significantly. That's an important issue that we need to address. We don't want to be in a situation where our aquaculture industry is, facing what's happened in other jurisdictions. And that's certainly something we work really closely with industry. We work really closely with the EPA. We work closely with SARDI to ensure that we're doing, there's good practices in play there. And, industry are very proactive in that space too.
Thanks.
Hello, my name's Sophia Gillis. A bit of a different question. Thank you all first very much for your hard work and for this opportunity. I'm a clinical psychologist working in private practice in the southern region. In short, seeing a really large exacerbation in clients' mental health conditions related to this. To put in perspective, is currently the single biggest topic raised in the treatment room, and in particular men's mental health is significantly impacted. Research will say this for a number of reasons, the interruptions to recreational activities, the repeated exposure to distressing scenes, as well as a range of other things like helplessness to roll up sleeves and repair from the situation. Research, I've done a range of research projects in disaster response, and understanding that the latest evidence will say that public response of adapted like psychological first aid at a community level can have a substantial mitigating effect on community mental health impacts. So my question is, will the funding, or can it please incorporate in the fund some interventions for the community wellbeing?
I don't know if you want to take it.
Oh, yes. Look, I'm just so grateful you brought that up because it's such an important issue. Tammy Allen is right here at the front, and please come and meet her afterwards. So this is absolutely a front and centre of what we're intending to do for health. We've put our hands up and we said, yes, we would very much like to assist with putting together what would be suitable. Preventive Health SA has already got quite a footprint in this space with community wellbeing hubs, and I think it'll be good to work with the likes of you and your association to make sure that we have the right supports in place. We'd be talking about people directly impacted, so fishers, for example, people who are in the industry, but we have to think more broadly about the whole of population as well.
From that level to all the first responders, which is in this instance anyone who's involved in cleaning up
Yes.
or surf.
Exactly.
The whole community is deeply connected.
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
and
No, you're
impacting. I'm seeing it across the board. I'm seeing, substantial exacerbation.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's absolutely down on what health is intending to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Sophia. And I'm great. I mean, it's interesting. I'm interested, if you can, very quickly. I mean, part of the challenge we've got here is acknowledging with a serious policy response, but also a degree of empathy with the challenge that we've got, right? Because it's a real, it's a problem. It's a big problem, right? And it's not good.
Yes.
But part of the challenge is, and this is something that we're grappling with, and I'm conscious of that the words that come out of my mouth are important. I'm going to think through what I say on this issue. It's also true that we don't want to unnecessarily exacerbate the size of the event to the extent that those people in unaffected communities feel the pain more than they necessarily should. And that's a really difficult balancing act. So my question, there's a question in this, is to what extent do you see the presentation of people with mental health concerns, to what extent do you think that is informed by people's lived experience, people walking down the beach and being confronted by this tragedy and having an impact, versus people, watching the television news and getting a sense that this is a catastrophic event which recovery is beyond us, which...
I think the challenge from our treatment perspective is that unlike what we would normally recommend for people having anxiety or eco-anxiety or whatever it might be to shut down their screens, is that they simply can't. They're going to the beach, they're seeing the dead fish, their dogs are getting sick, they're not able to go where they normally go for their recreation. So they're directly impacted, as well as, of course, the bombardment of media across the board. The difficulty is that because community perception is so high, once people perceive things, they're having emotional responses, and then there's of course this helps, information provides a certain level of that, but because of the dual impacts and the repeated exposure and all of these things, there's just an unavoidable exacerbation for wherever people might stand normally with mental health, that people like myself in a small pool of mental health professionals are not going to be able to hold off over the prolonged period. My research in the prolonged mental health impacts will say that as this goes on longer, I did research after the Black Saturday bushfires and etc. It's the prolonged effect that, and responses need to be obviously cost efficient, and you've got lots of difficulty with where to allocate funds, but my concern is the very real impacts on the mental health system if intervention at a secondary level, meaning at a sort of public level. I've looked at lots of research about the types of programs that could have a really efficient effect at a community level that would prevent the escalation and further costs down the track, and of course further distress.
Well, thank you, Sophia. Thank you. Now you've got the, because Rick's standing behind you, we've ticked over 8 o'clock. You are blessed with the responsibility of asking the best question of the night. Being the last.
Well, if that's the case. My name is Blaise Pilgrim. I have been in love with cuttlefish my entire life, and this weekend just passed I got to go see the giant cuttlefish for the first time in my life at Spencer Golf Adventures. Amazing. I am deeply passionate about the environment, about the
volunteer sector, the education sector, the disability sector, the mental health sector. There is a huge aspect of this challenge that is incredibly technical. That is not the area that I'm curious about. There's many people here asking the right questions. I don't need to. I'm interested in the complex, adaptive, human aspect, and I feel honoured to follow the question that has just been asked because it dovetails. I'm a believer that hope exists both nowhere and now here until we choose to create the space. Where we choose to create the space matters most. If you read the literature on what young people care about internationally, nationally, state-based and locally, it is no surprise, time and time again, mental health, the environment and our natural heritage is right at the top of the list of things that they care most about and that they are most worried about. I think I've counted 3, maybe 4 people who look under the age of 18 in this forum. I know that the messaging online is at times controversial and that young people can grab onto something that stands out, that is devastating, and that they hold it within themselves for quite some time. I was really relieved to hear the statement, when people feel heard, there's a burden lifted, there's a degree of trauma that can be let go of. My question for you guys is on behalf of all of the young people who time and time again tell us they feel tokenistically engaged, they feel unheard, they feel like the adults are looking after the solutions and that there's no room for them to be involved. How can we give them hope that is not dependent on a positive outcome, but is dependent on an attitude that we can rise to the challenge? And how, if anywhere within this funding, how are we looking to involve them as part of the solution, as we are all just temporary custodians here, holding the space as they move through it, and one day it will be their burden, however beautifully or however terribly we leave it for them. How are we going to meaningfully engage those young people and the future generations that are coming up and through? Because I'm surprised to see so few young people here, given how important it is.
Thank you for your question and the passionate way in which you've asked, which demonstrates a depth of feeling which I commend. Look, maybe if I tackle this by making a few top-line points. There are a few judgments that we make around the cabinet table, and I think this would be true for most governments, hopefully regardless of their political persuasion. There are a few judgments that we make where we don't contemplate, what does this mean for future generations? I host countless forums like this, and I think it's fair to say that inevitably people who give up watching Married at First Sight on TV to come to a forum like this, they're the engaged members of the community, right? You're not choosing to come to a forum like this unless you care. We always like to see evidence of younger people being engaged, and I think it would be unfair to characterise young people not engaged in subjects like this just because they're not at a forum like this. Young people choose to be engaged and follow and contribute to thoughtful discourse on issues through different means, and we have to have the wherewithal to be able to participate in those forums as much as ones like this. But I for one, and I was only at a school yesterday in Port Augusta, which is a long way from here, and a different community in many respects to the Brighton community, for instance. But I was only at this school yesterday, and every time I have an opportunity to engage with young people, particularly school age, but even in sort of early adulthood, I am never not amazed and uplifted. The infectious enthusiasm that comes with youth is as strong today as it ever has been. And people who seek to diminish the younger generation, I think they do themselves a disservice more than anyone. And I'm not suggesting you were doing that, far from it.
No, I was actually...
But in terms of this challenge, I think what they want is facts, right? I think what they want is information. I think what they want is their leaders, which are parents through the Premier, to operate with objectivity and consideredness rather than conspiracy. And I for one, have been a little bit frustrated in recent years, frankly, around a rush to weaponise misinformation and on occasion conspiracy to serve a political ends. And the best way, and I think that in turn actually has the consequence of either unreasonably exacerbating cynicism or justifying apathy. And that both are exceptionally dangerous. And the only way that we can confront that is by acting like good human beings and engaging with one another with civility and empathy from a basis of knowledge, reason. And any time a young person is engaged with on that basis, I see them respond enthusiastically and with optimism and hope. And so whether it be this challenge or any other, I have every confidence that we're capable of doing that. Right?
Can I jump in?
Yes, of course. And then we might
I'll
let
keep it
people go home.
I'll keep it very brief. I think young people need facts. I think young people need information. I think that young people need clear lines of communication to what the truth is. And I look across this panel and I see representation across the board except for on behalf of our future generations. Would you as a panel consider perhaps requesting Amber Brock-Fable from SA Youth Forum as a representative on these community forums to answer and field questions about how future generations are feeling about events such as this?
Certainly open-minded about how we could do that. Amber's a cracking young woman. I've got to spend a bit of time with her. And
I think if we make assumptions rather than ask them questions, that we're shooting ourselves in the foot before we begin. Thank you so much for fielding the question. Thank you for the extra time.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate deeply everything you guys are doing.
Thank you. So, I hope this has been useful. This is the first one. So, come back at the end of the last one in a couple of months' time and see if we've improved or not. You can whether or not we're doing a better job. But can I thank you for coming along tonight? I thought the questions were outstanding. We'll continue to keep people engaged. The government website, sa.gov.au, it uploads every bit of information that we have at our disposal, including very granular scientific data for those of you that are enthusiastic for that type of information. I think transparency is our friend around this. So whether it be this forum or using the government website, which was trying to make sure it's a single source of truth with all the information we have at our disposal, please feel free to use it, and we'll continue to tackle this challenge as we have any other one that's come our state's way. I think with aplomb and in a way that certainly hopefully inspires confidence more than anything else. Thank you very much.